Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. In this episode, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the Rise of Skywalker, Star Wars, the final chapter in the Star Wars saga, the Skywalker saga to be more specific. I'm also going to talk about spoilers. I'm not going to remember everything, but I am 45 minutes fresh out of the movie theater, so yeah, I'm gonna take you through everything I thought the movie did well, anything I thought the movie did kind of poorly. But first off, let me just tell you, I this is probably going to be a very unpopular opinion, seeing how people like to just hate on Star Wars, and I'm right there with you guys and girls. But I will say that Rise of Skywalker was a movie that while watching it, I felt like going back to the cinema and watching it one more time because I actually had a great time watching that movie. And I think part of the reason is I really felt like you were back in the hands of J.J. Abrams. And and the funny thing is, this movie, the first 45 minutes, sort of, or at least the first 30 minutes, felt a bit rushed and felt a bit. I was sitting there going a bit, wow, I'm feeling a bit lightheaded because there's so much exposition, there's so much going. You were told so many things, but quickly the pace quickly dropped and became a more cohesive story. And you were introduced to Palpatine, and you saw Snoke in parts of Snoke anyway in this weird liquid chamber thing in Palpatine's lair at Exegol, the apparently the Sith home world, where he and somehow had been resurrected. And I will say that the whole Palpatine thing worked up until the climax, but I will talk more about that when we get to that point. But the point is that it felt like we were back in the hands of the guy who created The Force Awakens. The guy who back then, because I liked The Force Awakens as well, I thought that The Force Awakens was a good movie. It was a bit on the nose, it was a bit, too heavy on the fan service, but at least it brought back Star Wars and it introduced new characters, and it in fact felt like there are a new storyline to move along. Where did Luke go all this time? Blah blah blah. All of that. And the Rise of Skywalker sort of felt like picking up where the Force Awakens left off, and completely just not talking about the Last Jedi, which I actually kind of dug. I actually kind of like that because I'm not a fan of The Last Jedi, and I don't even like The Last Jedi. I think it's a bad movie. I think it's bad for all the right reasons why it's bad. It's super forced. I'm not gonna talk about The Last Jedi. Fuck that movie. But I will talk about The Rise of Skywalker. That it was actually a good movie. I was moved by it. I felt empowered and rooting for the good guys, and for the first time the First Order actually felt a bit like an a threat to the galaxy. They actually felt like they were a threat imposed on the galaxy, and by a singular vision now from Kylo Ren. Now Kylo Ren's motive in this movie was, at least in the beginning, but that sort of was the exposition. Even the opening crawl stated that Kylo Ren is out searching for Palpatine, to something about his rage against him, so that there would be no one competing with him for supreme rule. He was basically trying to find Palpatine to take him out, so no one would threaten his position of supreme leader. Yeah, I would give him that. It was a bit stupid, but I don't know. It was a funny motivation, at least. Like, okay, this young Force user is going to take on Palpatine. Why? Anyway, but the story, after the first 30 minutes, the story sort of piped down a bit and was way easier to follow. The humor in this movie was finally good, except for a couple of times, but I will give him that. I will, I will allow it. You, we have to remember when we watch these kind of movies that are loved by so many people, that we have to acknowledge that the people creating this is no different than if you or I were creating this movie. People would disagree with us as well. It is so important when we judge these movies, except for The Last Jedi, which sucks. But J.J. Abrams has created two movies in this new sequel trilogy that actually felt cohesive, that actually felt like telling a story, that actually felt like having something that he wanted to tell. Now, the good thing one of the very very nice things finally about which was about fucking time was that they finally introduced a flaw in Rey. Now, some people might argue that no, it was just superficial flaws. There was nothing to it, but I don't agree with that. I will say that Kylo Ren beat her ass, kicked her ass, even with training in the beginning where she's training and can't seem to find her footing. It was a nice touch giving her that sort of flaws, and it finally felt like she was a character. She was a relatable human being. Now, I will say that Daisy Ridley gave a very nice performance throughout this entire movie. Actually delivered quite a memorable performance. That is one of the reasons why I will had the feeling of wanting to go back to the movies and watch it again. So yeah, the effects in this movie is amazing. There were, when they get to one of the forest moons of Endor, if it is in fact the forest moon of Endor, I didn't actually catch up on that. Anyway, where the Death Star is. By the way, that Death Star is pretty well held together, considering it was blown to pieces. But I will give it to him. It was cool seeing that wreckage of the Death Star and seeing old style stormtrooper helmets just laying about and this movie did a very nice job of tying that the old trilogy, the original trilogy by George Lucas, the 4, 5, and 6, with this new trilogy. There were hints here and there from the prequel trilogy, but still, I don't know why they didn't include Hayden Christensen in this. They should have. There was a moment. I'm gonna be all over the place in this one, so just go with it. In the climax of the movie, where Palpatine is basically his dispose of Kylo Ren, there's only Rey and Palpatine facing off together. By the way, Rey's a Palpatine. Now you know. There is really no way around it, and I think with the hand dealt to them, they played it well. I would say that. I still think Disney is too afraid to embrace the prequel trilogy more than they at least have done, and I thought there should be more prequel represented in this movie. Anyway, there was, through voiceover, you heard Hayden Christensen, you heard Ewan McGregor, you heard Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon. Which was really cool. But the one thing that would have been even cooler is when Rey is facing off Palpatine. Palpatine is force lightning at Rey, and she has the patched together Anakin Luke lightsaber in one hand and Leia's lightsaber in the other, crossing the blades and pushing back on Palpatine's lightning. And Palpatine says, "I am all the Sith." And basically that she cannot defeat him because he is all the Siths. And Rey responds by saying that she is all the Jedi. And it would have been so cool that you saw that shot of her where she's standing there looking at him, and then the Force ghosts of Qui-Gon and Luke and Anakin and Yoda and all these, maybe Mace Windu, I don't know, but these very important. Leia, Leia dies in this movie. There you go. I will get to Leia because I think it was a weird part. But anyway, that would have been a cool shot that they had sort of not doing anything but showing their faces and being there as Force ghosts supporting her, letting her fight the fight, but showing Palpatine that she is the light side of the Force is more powerful than the dark, because it's all about unity and having each other's backs and stuff like that. But it was cool to hear those voiceovers sort of empowering Rey and cheering along with her in that climax. I will say before I talk about Leia, Palpatine was a bit goofy. Not at the beginning of the movie, but when he pulled all the life force of the force from Rey and Kylo Ren, I guess it was, to become Palpatine once again. Up until that point, he was sort of hooked to this giant machine arm that held him, and he was not the Palpatine you know. He had white, milky eyes and no real scarring. Just looked like something that was not a complete Palpatine. Anyway, when he sucked all the life out of them, essentially, he became Palpatine again. And he sort of, unfortunately, he sort of became the Palpatine of Revenge of the Sith, rather than Return of the Jedi, where, laughing. That was a terrible Palpatine laugh. But sort of when his evil, went so far, it became kind of goofy, like he was laughing at his own jokes in a way. I don't remember if he did, but that sort of laugh was like, oh, okay, you're laughing too much now. You're not intimidating anymore. Now you're just goofy. They went a bit overboard with the Palpatine part, but once again, giving the hand they were dealt, I think they pulled it off in a decent manner. Now, talking about Leia is a tough topic to talk about because, unfortunately, Carrie Fisher passed recently. Not recently, but it still feels recently. Seeing her back on screen was weird. It would also have been weird to write her out between 8 and 9. But I think the way they utilized her in this movie was only to have her die in this movie. It felt like that. There were scenes when she was talking to Rey where you could see it was sort of cutouts from The Force Awakens, and sometimes, the dialogue in that particular scene she was in with Rey or whoever only served to fit the existing dialogue of hers so that she would have screen time. And now it felt a bit weird. It felt a bit like she wasn't really there. It was like her eye line was a bit out of focus, and she always looked a bit past the ones she was talking to and interacting with. But once again, giving the hand they were dealt, having Carrie Fisher, they did the right thing. There's no doubt about that. They didn't. It was not bad. It was not. It was just weird, and maybe the whole thing about it was just weird to see someone brought back to life like that. It was a different thing with Peter Cushing in Rogue One because he'd been gone for so long, and he was brought back completely through CGI, where this was unused footage and spliced together scenes, and it was a strange experience. But still, if you can look past that sort of strangeness surrounding it, it was a decent attempt. I will give them that. It was the only way they could do it, really, and I will applaud them for sending her off in a decent way. It was not the best, but I don't know if anybody else could have pulled it off any better than what they did with this movie. I touched on this before. The visuals of this film was amazing. This was probably the most beautiful. Now that's probably going too far, but it was so well made visually, this movie. Especially it struck me when Rey was taking this glider thing through on Endor, going to the wreckage of the Death Star or whatever, and there was this shot, like helicopter shot, looking down at these giant waves. There was a shot of this in the trailer, and she's on this glider, and the animation of these waves were so beautiful. Now it will look stupid if it actually turns out that this was real waves, but I doubt it. But very well made, and the dog fights and just the overall visuals were amazing, and the sense of physical props and physical sets and interactions, and seeing Tantive 4, I guess it was Tantive 4, the blockade runner from A New Hope, sitting there, and you could see this was a build-out thing, just like the Millennium Falcon was, and the X-Wing fighters, and so on and so on. It's just a very well. It just felt good. It just felt like the actors were, in fact, interacting with the spaceships and settings. Now, let's go over the overall. I will say, I don't know if I want to rank this in sort of any, stars of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the best, but I would say this was a solid 7. I would say. This movie made everything right The Last Jedi did wrong. It did what it had to do in order to course correct anything The Last Jedi had fucked up. And I'm so happy that they did what they did in order to make this right again. Because they could just as easily have felt the need to stay loyal to Rian Johnson and his bullshit of a movie and then went off from there. But no, they course corrected their own mistakes, and I will applaud them for that. Good on you, Kathleen Kennedy, for finally taking your head out of your fucking ass and actually doing a good thing for once. Now, there were still these diversity themes in the movie, and there were still all of these, a bit of the social justice thing in it as well. But it is sort of given in any big movie today, so I will actually not give them any kind of hate for it. So let's go over the characters. Let's start with some of the new characters. Jenna, the female character. I don't remember the actress playing her, but that was they find her on Endor, and it turns out she and that whole gang or tribe she's with is actually deserted First Order stormtroopers, which gave her a direct connection with Finn, which actually made Finn's character better. But we'll get to Finn, but the Jenna character was decent, and there was a play on that she could be Lando's daughter, or maybe Lando was just hitting on her. There was an exchange between, after the fight was over and they won, and they were celebrating Lando, and Jenna was sitting there, and he looked over his shoulder, and she sat right next to him, and she was like, "Well, where do you come from?" No, he asked her. She asked him, and he said he was from the Gold System or something like that. And he asked her where she was from, and she didn't know, or she was keeping that from him, or she already knew that he was her dad, or something like that. And then Lando said, "Well, we may just have to find out," or something like that. I don't know. You can interpret it any way you want, but I'm pretty sure she was Lando's daughter, and once again, a bit too convoluted. But anyway, the character of Jenna served the purpose that Rose didn't do in The Last Jedi. And speaking of Rose, she was barely in this movie. Pippin was more in this movie than Rose were. And I'm actually pleased with that, because I didn't like the Rose character. I just don't like the character of Rose, because it represents so much of what was wrong with The Last Jedi. The entire, perspective of The Last Jedi sort of was reflected through Rose, like light through a prism in a way. And that's why I just don't like Rose, the character of Rose, because she just represents everything that The Last Jedi represents. Stupid lines and stupid subplots that leads nowhere, and just overall annoying presence. So yeah, Rose is pretty much not in this movie, and Finn pretty much just gives her the cold shoulder, and she's left on her own. You could just as easily as have cut her out of this movie, and it would have made no difference, and you wouldn't miss her. On the First Order side, you have General Pride, the new, I guess, having The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi making a complete ass of Hux. General Pride was brought on to give an intimidating side, an intimidating face to the First Order, and he did. He actually succeeded well, having him interact directly with the hologram of Palpatine, and also, just a side note, Palpatine's name for, he made the huge new star fleet of Star Destroyers, and that would no longer be called the First Order. It would be called the Final Order. And yes, I will agree with everyone out there saying that is the stupidest name since the First Order, the Final Order. Anyway, but yes, General Pride worked. He had that sort of Nazi vibe to him that the generals and commanders of the original trilogy sort of captured in a way. And also just in general, the interactions between Kylo Ren, who wore the helmet way more this time around, was way more a sort of uncomfortable figure to be around. He was obsessed with power, and it all just felt way more like the Empire did in the original trilogy, where in this Rise of Skywalker they had sort of a board meeting or whatever, and there was this general. You could sense it from miles away, but there was this general or commander or whatever sitting around the table, just what does Palpatine want to do? I'm gonna talk back to Kylo Ren, and Kylo Ren, of course, threw him into the ceiling and choked his ass out or whatever he did, but he killed him, and there was this sort of feeling to it that not only was the First Order really on its, rampage in terms of power, but they were also really determined to achieve this ultimate power, and no one, not even their own ranks, would speak against them. And while staying in the First Order, Hux is completely useless in this movie, just like he was in The Last Jedi, and he dies, so that's a good thing. General Pride shoots him directly in his guts. The whole sort of one of the subplots in the movie is that there is a spy within the ranks of the First Order, and from the minute I sat down, I thought the only one who could be a spy and who can they can pull it off with was Hux, and they did. And I based that on the way Kylo Ren and Supreme Leader Snoke kicked his ass in The Last Jedi. He was sort of like fed up with this, and his line was, at one point they go to save Chewie from the First Order on one of these Star Destroyers, and Hux helps them escape. And Finn asks him, why you're helping us? And Hux basically says, I don't want to see you win, but I want to see Kylo Ren lose. So there was this sort of personal hatred against Kylo Ren that motivated him. And Hux could once again just as easily has been written out of the story, just like Rose could have been. But I guess he served the purpose to in some way redeem himself and get back at Kylo Ren, only to be shot then in the next scene and die. And by the way, I've never seen a person getting shot by a laser, in up close. And actually looking at the person being shot, feeling like that bolt of laser hit that person hard. That was I don't know why I remembered that so vividly, but that just felt like, wow, this guy just got shot for good. You could almost feel the impact of that laser in his chest or in his guts. Great effect. Staying in the First Order, Kylo Ren is Kylo Ren in this movie. I don't really know what to say about Kylo Ren throughout the most of the movie, other than he got redeemed in the end, and I guess he was on the path this entire time of trying to forget and trying to tell himself that everything he's doing is right. He's fighting for the greater good. He's fighting to restore balance. He's fighting against everything he hates. And the First Order just happens to be his output for this. I will say one thing. The interaction, there were in The Last Jedi, the one cool thing about The Last Jedi, that were these Force FaceTime calls, or whatever you want to call them, between Rey and Kylo Ren, which worked great in The Last Jedi, and I appreciate that from The Last Jedi. They worked even better in this. Strange thing that allowed them to pass physical material through these Force FaceTime calls. Like Ren could reach out and grab a necklace of her through this and then stand with the necklace in his hand. And the same thing, Rey could pass a lightsaber down her back and give it to Ren in another place. And this movie sort of introduced a lot of Force powers, also the power of healing. I can transfer a bit of Force power to you, so that I can heal your wound. Rey did this with a giant underground sand serpent on this and on yet another desert planet they went to. Anyway, it's sort of convenient to have the Force and then make up new Force powers whenever you're stuck in your script writing. But anyway, they were sort of forced, but I I will allow it. It was stupid, but it was what it was, I guess. So yeah, those force powers was a bit stupid, but I felt a real disconnect with Finn in this movie. And I will actually say, of all the characters in this movie, he was the one that just didn't do anything good for me. It was weird. Finn had such a weird presence in this entire movie, and to me at least, and his character was actually really annoying. The entire where they all went, Chewie, BB-8, C-3PO, Finn, Poe, Rey, and they met this Dio droid, which was also just a plot device. Finn sort of just I don't know, man. It was just weird having Finn there and his weird sense of swaggery gangster humor and street humor, which to me just doesn't fit in this universe. You can have humor, and this movie nailed the humor way better than The Force Awakens and Last Jedi did. But still, you don't need street humor in a Star Wars movie. Lando humor is allowed as street humor because Lando humor is, hey, how are you? And very much elegant and smooth and but it's very specific to a character. That whole kind of, you ain't talking to me, man, that kind of weird sense of street humor is just doesn't work for me. And I think just Finn was just a bit wasted. He was there through the entirety of the film, but he didn't really do anything. He was just along for the ride, being there to be sort of a moral advocate for Rey's behavior to the rest of the gang. So yeah, I didn't really care for Finn. Poe, on the other hand, had a great character arc in this. And I think actually Poe has gone from being, once again, if we ignore The Last Jedi, which everybody should do, Poe went from being the idea of the best pilot to becoming the general after General Leia passed away in this movie. And his story arc came full circle, I think. And Poe was more on the nose in this movie. He was more like, him and Finn got in each other's grills more than usual. And I couldn't really figure out why this was. It was sort of like every time Rey was there, they would sort of like be in each other's face. And I don't know if this was an early part of an early draft in the scripts where they would sort of fight over her in a way, but yeah, I don't know. It was weird. Poe had a lot more to do in this movie and a lot more weight to his character, to me at least. And seeing, his face after being general, and unaware of what to do and being in charge of this huge battle this final battle against the what was that? The final order. And seeing how they were just smacked down like flies, and seeing his face, looking at all his comrades and all his friends and family basically being shut down from the sky, and apologizing to everybody, I don't know how to do this, and then Lando comes in for the rescue with the entire galaxy on his back. I guess he went through his phone book and made some calls. Poe worked great. He had weight to him. I mean, Oscar Isaac is a great actor, He has that kind of swagger to him, that kind of Han Solo a bit swagger, like the rogue, the scoundrel. And they played on that as well in this movie, gave him a bit more backstory that he was actually a spy smuggler back in the day, and we get to meet his former love interest on Kimiji or Kimjimi or whatever the planet was. I forget, one of the new ones. The one with a helmet on. You don't actually get to see her face, but she was a cool character, useless character, but still not a useless character like Rose. But and I'm not hating on the actress playing Rose here, folks. I'm hating on the fact that Rian Johnson made an actress portray a character this stupid, because I think Kelly Marie Tran has a lot more potential than Rian Johnson set her up to. Anyway, but that new character, Sori was her character's name, was actually quite nice. Useless, but decent. Basically, all she did was help them along her way. And I guess in an adventure movie, fantasy movie, whatever, that is what you meet people along your journey who help you on your way. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that. Lando was actually utilized decent in this movie, I would say. They found him on a planet, and had he only had that cameo on that desert, yet another desert planet, I would actually be fine with that. But they brought him back to sort of fly the Millennium Falcon again alongside with you, and that was fine as well. Um, but the thing they did with Lando, which was once again a clever choice in this movie, was that they weren't sort of force feeding him into you, like saying, "Oh, look, Lando's back. Look at Lando. Here's Lando," like forcing him into your face. Oh, look at Lando. See what Lando can do. No, they weren't. They were just sort of letting him be there. And I actually just think it worked very organically. And Wedge Antilles was back for just a brief moment. I'm sure there are other cameos I missed. Yeah, it was nice to see him just for a flash. Blink and you'll miss him. Knights of Ren is finally in this movie. I will say the thing that they did with both Kylo Ren and Rey I will talk about Rey, but the one thing they did, and I'm referring to when Kylo Ren redeemed himself after I guess it was supposed to represent a subconscious conversation he had with himself, with his father Han Solo. Yeah, Han Solo's in this very briefly. Not as Han Solo being back from the dead, but as Han Solo talking to his son within the memory of Kylo Ren. Sort of like Han Solo representing the arguments within Kylo Ren to step out of the dark side and into the light. And it was nice. It was touching. Harrison Ford is just great whenever he's on screen. I love that guy. And but yeah, they sort of utilized weakness in both Kylo Ren and Rey. Where had Rey not given Kylo passed down the lightsaber through Force, FaceTime, whatever, to Kylo Ren, he would not have been able to defeat the Knights of Ren. They would have kicked his ass and killed him. I'm sure of it. That was at least what they were hinting at. Maybe with all the powers within Kylo Ren, he will be able to explode them from the inside using the Force. I don't give a fuck. I don't know. The movie presented it as if he hadn't gotten that lightsaber from Rey through the FaceTime, Force call, whatever, he would have been dead. Oh, before we talk about Rey, Luke Skywalker is briefly in this movie. He does a good job. It was so good. Rey is about to throw away the lightsaber, and they stick it in the face of Rian Johnson. Rey has taken Kylo after a fight with Kylo Ren where he defeats her. And she defeats him, and it's all weird. And she stabs his lightsaber through his gut, and she heals him again. And Leia dies, and it is all just very hard to describe. But it all happens at the same time. Rey steals his TIE fighter and flies to Ahch-To, where Luke was hiding, and burns the Star Destroyer. And with simply, overpowered and saying, "I'm gonna hide here just like you." And she's about to throw the lightsaber into the burning TIE fighter, and Luke, as a Force ghost, grabs the lightsaber and walks out of the flames and onto approaching Rey. And some line I don't remember saying that you don't throw away a lightsaber, or you don't disrespect the lights. Something along those lines, which was a clear "fuck you, Rian Johnson" line. Because Rian Johnson made Luke Skywalker throw away a lightsaber, just like it was wrapping for a piece of candy in The Last Jedi. Luke had a great... You could see Mark Hamill in this movie. Just for the cameo, basically, it was. You could see Mark Hamill being Luke again. He, just for that scene, he was Luke again. Positive, always looking at the horizon, believing in the good stuff, and telling Rey that just teaching her and comforting her and being a teacher, So yeah, Mark Hamill, I'm so happy that he got that performance in this movie, because from what you can see online through the videos and the way he talked about The Last Jedi, he was bummed. He did his part in The Last Jedi, but he was bummed, man. You could see he was bummed out about that movie. And with good reason, He did a great performance, gave a great performance in The Last Jedi. considering what he had to work with. But it felt like he just died on the inside by doing this. But this was redeeming him, and I hope that people will agree with me on that, on the behalf of Mark Hamill. And I guess that leads us to Rey, the infamous Mary Sue of the Star Wars universe. And I've agreed up until this point that she is a Mary Sue. But I think this movie gave Rey way more depth, and not a lot of depth, but enough to make her a relatable character. You saw her on that desert planet, and the First Order had taken Chewie in as a prisoner in one of these First Order troop transport ships, and she didn't know there was two of them. But the final one, she used the force to sort of keep it from taking off, mid-air. And Kylo Ren was there, and they sort of battled to who could control this thing. And she just let go of her powers. She used Force lightning without intending to do so, and blew the ship up, which was really cool. And you could just see she was just devastated. She killed Chewie. Her powers were once again the impacting people around her in a negative way, and that sort of was a red thread throughout her entire arc in this movie, that she was carrying not only this great gift, but had realized this was also a great curse that she needed to control. And that's also why she went to Act 2, in sort of like the point of no return of the movie, before the third act, the climax of the third act. Because she was like, I don't know what to do with this. No one is teaching me. Oh, by the way, Leia was teaching her in the beginning of the movie. I don't know why they didn't utilize Force Ghost Luke Skywalker, but I guess that was a Kathleen Kennedy thing, to have that there was not a man going to teach a woman. That whole feminist bullshit thing. And it was strange because Leia has never been any kind of Jedi master who was able to teach anyone else. So having her teach Rey was weird, because you know that she has the Force, and is just as Force sensitive as Luke, but has sort of decided to, instead of going down the path of being a Jedi, she has chosen the path of a politician and a leader within the war military. She's a general, and where Luke's weapon is a lightsaber and the Force, her weapon is her ability to talk and being a strategic leader. So having her train Rey is really weird, and I guess it was sort of, how do we fit Carrie Fisher into this movie as much as possible, and it just turned out to be that way. It should have been Luke, there's no doubt about that. Anyway, but Rey had flaws in this. She was beaten. She was defeated. She had baggage. She was carrying a legacy. You discovered that she was a Palpatine, and the reason why she was left on Jakku in the first place was not that their parents were nobody and left her just to save their own skin. No, they left her to protect her from Palpatine. I guess her son, Palpatine's son, was the father of Rey, and they were nobody because they chose to be that way to protect her. So all I've told you is true, from a certain point of view. So yeah, Rey's parents have always been nobody, just like Kylo Ren said in The Last Jedi. But they were nobody because they chose to be nobody in order to protect Rey from Palpatine. Because Palpatine, apparently all this time, had been out for Rey, because she would be the one that could restore him back into his former glory. And that was, in fact, the entire reason why he wanted Rey, was because she would have to kill him and pledging to the Sith, so that he could take her, and by doing so, he would absorb all of her power, and she would enable him to becoming more powerful than ever before, I guess. But she didn't. She killed Palpatine, and had they just, I don't know. This is a great movie. Wrapping up. Oh, by the way, I gotta say, she returned to Tatooine, After they had won, you saw Cloud City again, and you saw Star Destroyers falling all over the universe, all over the galaxy, falling over Cloud City. A Star Destroyer falling onto Jakku. You remember that Star Destroyer from the Battle of Jakku? That was one. The first trailer for Force Awakens. I think it was even the teaser trailer where you see that little Ray speeder going by the bottom of the screen, and you see this huge wreckage of a Star Destroyer. Right? You remember that? You saw that again, but with a new Star Destroyer falling onto, sort of in behind that. Once the good guys won, and the final order was defeated, and it was sort of a nice touch, saying that every generation has its battle in a way, and light will always find a way or whatever. And you saw Endor, you saw Ewoks. Ewoks had a brief cameo in this movie, and that was nice. But yeah, overall, I will say this. No, oh, sorry, sorry, I keep losing my train of thought. Back to Tatooine. Rey goes to Tatooine. You see Sandcrawler, you see Jawas, and she goes to Luke's Owen and Beru's home. And it's all, sand has been blowing there for 30 years, and it's sort of like slowly becoming part of the dunes. And she picks up this piece of metal that she finds in the sand, and slides down into the I don't know what you call it, the common area of the part of Luke's home on Tatooine that was sort of underground where you could look up. It was sort of a hole in the ground. She skates down there, and you hear that John Williams score from The Force Awakens when you're first introduced to Rey as a scavenger, which is a very nice, throwback. And she wraps up Luke's and Leia's lightsabers in a piece of cloth and buries it in the sand. And then this old lady comes along, just this stranger, saying something like, "It's been a long time since anybody has been here who she was." And Rey says she was Rey. And the lady asks, "Rey who?" And I guess Rey's about to answer that she doesn't have a lineage because she's not proud of the whole Palpatine thing. It's like being born with Hitler as your last name, I guess. And she looks and sees Force ghosts of Luke and Leia standing there and smiling to her, because Leia knew all along that she was a Palpatine, so did Luke, and that sort of empowered Rey to take on the name of Skywalker, and she said her name was Rey Skywalker. And the morale in this story, if you can say it like that, is that you choose your own destiny, even though, just like Luke did, even though your lineage is dark side. Even the same thing with Kylo Ren. You choose who you want to be. You choose your own path and who you want to be in this story. You are not your heritage. You are not what your parents were. And that is sort of my takeaway from this movie. Oh, and by the way, there was a cool scene, really cool scene, just a flashback from Luke when he's talking. Sorry, I'm all over the place once again. When he's talking to Rey and Ahch-To about Leia's lightsaber, and he's the one who gives Rey Leia's lightsaber to Rey, where you see that Luke was actually teaching Leia lightsaber fight, and they are having these sort of helmets on that is where they have a blast shield down in front of it, so they can't see, and they're fighting with lightsaber. Luke is green and Leia's blue, and then the shields go up because Leia beats him, and you see young Luke and young Leia. It was such a nice little thing, putting in a bit of meat to the story between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, just that there was actually a bit going on there. And I know I said before, Leia was not a Jedi, but that was sort of, she chose not to be that thing. She had the choice to make, and she chose not to be. She made an informed decision. So, is The Rise of Skywalker the right conclusion to the Skywalker saga? Yes, I would say so. Once again, giving the hand that J.J. Abrams had and his team had to play based on the fuck-ups that Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson were responsible for, he wrapped up this trilogy, this saga, very nicely, and no one could have done it better than he did. They could have done it differently, but they couldn't have done it better. I still think it was weird having Palpatine in it, and obviously we can't not address the elephant in the room. The reason why Palpatine is in there is because that maybe J.J. Abrams from the beginning thought that Rey was and had planned out that Rey was a Palpatine and was planning on bringing him back or bringing Palpatine back through what would have been episode 8. But never did because Ryan Johnson fucked up that turkey nice and good. But the reason why Palpatine feels forced in this is because he feels like the safe choice to wrap everything up. And it was weird to have Palpatine back, and he was a bit goofy at times, but it worked. It absolutely worked. And it wasn't weird enough for me to say, nope, this is a bad movie. This is just as bad as The Last Jedi. No, this is not as bad as The Last Jedi. People out there thinking that. You're entitled to your opinion. I'm not going to argue with you. But to me, this is a great follow-up to The Force Awakens because I'm choosing to ignore The Last Jedi. The only thing I'm sorry about is that there's no J.J. Abrams Star Wars movie between Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker. I think they should, from the very beginning, and let's sort of recap here the last 5 minutes or so about what they should have done differently. They should have contracted J.J. Abrams to make a 3-picture movie, a sequel trilogy, so that you could have a cohesive storyline. You could have a singular vision. Of course, there would be Kathleen Kennedy greasy fingerprints all over it anyway, but at least you would have those greasy fingerprints on the same piece of string, not completely different strings all over the place. So yeah, I think J.J. Abrams did a great job. I think everybody involved with this movie. Oh! I almost forgot. C-3PO in this movie is great. He has a very big part in this movie, and they wipe his memory because he translates some Sith writing that they need in order to get to Exegol. And his programming prohibits him from translating. He still recorded it in his memory, but he cannot tell people, he cannot translate it because that is against his programming. So they memory wipe him so that he can, in fact, that's why you see 3PO with red eyes in the trailer. Because apparently when a protocol droid reads Sith, his eyes become red. I guess that is a programming, and he's programmed to not be able to read it. But if he does anyway, they at least made a code in him that will turn his eyes red. I don't know. Don't overthink anything. It's Star Wars, guys. Come on. Go back to the original trilogy and pick it apart. You can do that just as much as you can do with the prequel trilogy and with the sequel trilogy. Except for The Last Jedi, which sucks. But yeah, C-3PO is in this. He's a great character. R2-D2 is basically not in this movie, which is a shame. But they are playing on BB-8 and the new D-O. And D-O is only a plot point for them to get along. A MacGuffin, so to speak. But C-3PO is great. His humor in this movie is on point, and I think they just did an overall great job. I recommend this movie. I do. I left the theater. Maybe it's because my expectations were so low, but I left this movie thinking that my hope for Star Wars has been restored. The good won in the end. There are still bumps on the road. There's still a forced gay kiss in this movie, which they can cut out for the Chinese market or whatever they want to do. There are still these sort of little thorns thrown at you here and there, but it's so minor that blink and you'll miss it, and just don't choose to latch on to it. We are in 2020, and this movie is way better than I had expected it to be. This movie is way better than I think a lot of people expected it to be, and I think it's a best conclusion to the Skywalker saga that Disney could do based on the fuck-ups they have done so far. And it is up to you to interpret how you want to interpret that. This was a great movie. I recommend it to anybody who's a Star Wars fan. There were kids there watching it with me, There were old people and everybody left with a smile on their face. There's hope for Star Wars. There is. I just hope that Lucasfilm learns from their mistakes and makes the future brighter than they have made their past so far. Because remember, Lucasfilm, you choose your own story. Thank you for listening.